Unicorn Overlord was probably one of my most anticipated games this year by far, and for good reason. Probably my favorite genre of games is tactical RPGs. I mean, I've spent thousands of hours in this genre of games, which easily makes it my most played. There's just something about going into one fight and feeling completely overpowered to going into the next one and making one wrong move and everything's over. Or playing against super smart AI who really make you think about every move that you have to make. Or actually having to plan out which units you have to attack due to what strength and weaknesses they have. So when I saw this game, I was super excited. Now, everyone's mostly talking about Vanillaware, which is the company that created Unicorn Overlord, and I'm gonna be honest, the only other game I've actually played by them is 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, which at the time of this recording, I'm actually playing through it right now, and I'm loving it too, and it's also a tactical RPG, but that'll be another video. The other games Vanillaware had made, I've never actually touched a single one of them. But let's talk about Unicorn Overlord and see if it lived up to all my anticipation. Before we get further in, if you do enjoy the video, don't forget to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me out. Thanks. Before I jump into this review, I want to make this disclaimer. This is a regular review, not a 100% like I normally do. I'm going to be going into depth of certain features of the game, and the story, and possibly the plot. But I'm also going to be doing my absolute best to avoid spoiling anything for you guys, but I can't make any promises. So feel free to skip the story section if you want to avoid anything. I'll leave timestamps down below. First off, let's start with the background for the game and dive into the story and the plot. There's going to be some spoilers, so feel free to skip this section. The game kicks off with you being introduced to the Queen of the Kingdom, who also happens to be the main character's mother. Unfortunately, at this time, your kingdom has become under attack by one of your mother's most trusted generals who is looking to rule the entire continent. Your mother realizes that every one of her lords has betrayed her, and they now stand before her kingdom with hopes of defeating her. Understanding the gravity of the situation, your mother places the main character Elaine in the hands of her most trusted knight, Sir Joseph. Joseph is tasked with protecting the prince and making sure that he's able to grow up and be prepared to take on anything. Then there's a giant time skip of about 10 years. The general who is now known as Galerius rose up against your mother and has taken over the entire continent and all of the nations that are included. At the same time, within the last 10 years, Elaine, the main character, has grown up on a small island in the middle of the continent that is completely surrounded by water on all sides. The island made it ideal for Sir Joseph to hide Elaine. Growing up, he had his best friend Lex, who had been training alongside him, as well as Scarlet, who is a priestess of the Orthodoxy who had also grown up with Elaine and Elaine. Eventually, once Galerius had developed his kingdom, Zenoira, he eventually sends troops to the small island that Elaine resides on. This is where our adventure really begins, and you then are allowed to start taking control of everything. Shortly after these troops land on the island, you'll be introduced to the combat within the game. After this, you'll receive a ring from Joseph, which ends up being the Ring of the Unicorn, which has been passed down within the royal family for generations. You'll end up using the ring on some of the troops who are fighting for Zenoira, and you'll come to learn that they're actually being mind controlled by Galerius, and they're being forced to fight for Zenoira. But the Ring of the Unicorn can free them from this mind control. You'll then set off for the mainland, where Joseph states that he has a few people in place who are ready to join Elaine's cause and try to take down Zenoira and reclaim the throne. Throughout the story, you will travel through multiple different regions, reclaiming different towns and forts and taking back these nations from Zenoira. While all of this is happening, Elaine will be building an army and managing multiple different units during different battles. This will eventually lead to the final fight with Galerius. After this battle, the game will throw in a bunch of different plot twists that you probably won't see coming. Now, I don't want to spoil anything major within the story, since I do believe this is one that you want to experience for yourself. So I'm going to say this now from the beginning. I absolutely love this story, and it was amazing. I really do believe for me that this game is one of the best games and stories I've experienced this year so far. Not only does this game have a straightforward, good feeling story that will leave you satisfied with how the ending is, but it also throws in some of the biggest and wildest twists and turns that you wouldn't expect. Another reason I enjoyed the story so much is how many side stories and how much detail went into building the other characters within the world. There's a ton of different backstories to each character of what they did before the war and how they got connected and joined up with the Liberation Army. Another one of the things I love most is that some of the enemies within the game can be recruited to fight on your side. I mean, it really makes you feel good when you realize the character who is fighting for Zenoira is only doing it because they have some sort of leverage on them. But not only can you defeat Zenoira in this battle and assist that character, and then they join up in your army. Not every scenario is like this. Most of the characters who are fighting for Zenoira are being forced to, but there are some who are being persuaded, whether it's for money, food, their sibling is being held hostage, etc. There could be a bunch of different reasons. But it doesn't stop there. With the side characters in this game, they could belong to either Zenoira or one of the other factions, being like a mercenary or thieves that are just roaming the overworld. Most of them are not directly aligned with Zenoira. For example, there's a group called the Rock Rats, which you'll run into frequently throughout the main story or just exploring the world. They're just a group of bandits and thieves who are in control of a town and fort that you'll end up freeing at some point if you choose to. But eventually you can convince the leader to change his ways and join the army, or you can get rid of him. The game gives you both options, which is why I love the side characters so much. In my playthrough, I did end up recruiting him, and he was an absolute beast of a unit. Another example of how unique the characters can be with their own stories is there's a character in the northern country called Merard, and he's a werelion. and he's actually the last lion bistro left. And don't worry, we'll talk about bistros later, but without divulging too much into the story, just to give you a taste of how unique some of these side characters' stories can be, is you will eventually learn that he was never always a were-lion, that he was actually a human first. Now I know I've said it before, but I absolutely adored the story and all the side content with it, and I do believe this is one that you'll want to experience. Next, I'm going to be diving into Unicorn Overlord's world, and I'll be talking about the different nations within this world, and I'll be finishing off with how the overworld works and looks. The game has 5 different nations within the game. There's Elaine's home country, which is Cornea. There's a neighboring country, Drakenhold, to the east. To the south, there's Elheim. To the north, there's Bastorius. And to the west, across the water, there's Albion. Each one of these nations being fairly unique and having their own types of units to them, which makes them fun to go and explore. However, Drakenhold and Cornea do share a ton of similarities due to them both being occupied by humans, but Drakenhold does introduce some new units fairly early into the game, but we'll get there. I'm going to be talking about Cornea first and advancing in the order that I progress throughout the game. Although I do believe the game is fairly linear, Cornea being the nation that Elaine was born in will be the first one that you're introduced to. There really isn't anything crazy when it comes to the overworld look of Cornea. It has mountains, forests, and plains, but it doesn't have anything that makes it stand out either, other than the capital city being super beautiful when you finally reach it in the post game. So next up I chose to go to Drakenhold. The game does offer you to pick between Drakenhold and Elfheim, but this just happens to be the order that I picked it in. I understand I did say earlier that Drakenhold and Cornea hold a lot of similarities, which is true, but there's also some differences between the two, and some things that Drakenhold does offer. Drakenhold has hardly any green to it. It is mostly desert and mountains, and that's what makes it fairly unique. And somehow they made a desert look really pretty, with little trees and rivers thrown within it. The one big thing that Drakenhold has to offer is the Colosseum. Now, this Colosseum is one big post-game piece, but you can utilize it during the game and throughout the main story. Now, with the Colosseum, you are going to be performing offline battles as well as online battles. I won't talk much about the online battle portion of it, since I didn't really spend too much time with it myself, since I did want to experience the game first. But you can basically pick one of your units to go up against other players online and compete for Colosseum coins and rank. The offline battles really only offer 2 different things, and that's if you complete all the battles. I believe it's around 30-ish, you will gain a character that you met throughout the main story, but you can also complete offline battles and get Colosseum coins. The Colosseum coins can be used to purchase different equipment, and some of the equipment can be considered some of the best in the game, since it can take a while to get to it, but I didn't really find it necessary to use any of that to complete the main story. So next up, let's jump into Elfheim. This is where everything starts to change. I did decide to go to Elfheim after Drakenhold. There was no particular reason for this, it's just the way it happened for me. You can pick whatever you want to do. But Elfheim is where I realized how stunning the overworld of this game really was. This country being inhabited mostly by elves as well as some Cornean refugees. A lot of the nation has forests, which are just stunning. They also have some stunning major cities within this nation that are really well done, and the way it looks surrounded by water is absolutely amazing. They also have a version of the Tree of Life that gives life to all of the forests within this nation, which at some point you'll have to defend. The one unique thing I did also find within this nation was how one of the forests and areas had completely been burned down and has been left to nothing but dead shrubbery. It added such a dark tone and ambiance to the game, and I really did enjoy that. Next I went to Bastorius, the land of the Beastrels. This nation is nothing but snow and mountains, yet somehow it's also somewhat peaceful being surrounded by all of it. Other than this being the snowy region within the overworld, it doesn't really offer anything unique, but what it does offer is the introduction of the Beastrels, which are essentially human-like beasts which can consist of owls, wolves, foxes, and bears. You are able to recruit all of those into your army, but we'll get to that more later. Throughout your time here, you'll mostly be chasing down Zenora as they're looking for an item. Lastly, I was able to visit Albion, which is the home of the Orthodoxy, which is essentially this game's version of the Holy Church. That being said, this is a very holy and religious region. This probably was my more favorite region and nation to visit, although it felt significantly smaller than the others. The nation is extremely mountainous, so flying units will definitely excel here. Overall, I really did enjoy each one of these different nations. I felt like each one of them offered something new each time I went to it. It really made me feel refreshed, like I wasn't just playing the same repetitive copy and paste style of game. The art style for the overworld really made it even more enjoyable. Just something about each one of these nations just really made me love the game even more. Bouncing off of the last topic of the overworld and the world itself, let's talk about the different towns and forts that the game has to offer. Now, there really isn't too much to them, other than each nation has a generic looking town sprite that you can rebuild throughout the game. So I want to discuss the purposes of the towns and forts, as well as the walled cities throughout it, because they do have a few differences between them. Let's start with talking about the towns and the walled cities, and then I'll finish off with discussing the few differences and added things that the cities have that the towns don't. Throughout the game, you'll be liberating different cities and towns from the clutches of Zenora or different different mercenaries or bandits that hold claim to them. When you finally do liberate a town or city, you will notice that you'll have to restore the town or city since there has been some damage to it. If you don't restore it, you will lose some options. For example, when you restore a city, you'll be able to station a guard, which does actually collect resources for you over time and automatically send it to your inventory. You will also have access to a few different tabs such as Armorer, Provisioner, which as you would expect allows you to purchase new armor, trinkets, weapons, as well as healing items or anything you can use to assist you in a battle. In some scenarios, you'll have access to boarding a ship if the town or city is a port city, which allows you to traverse to different areas of the map, but you have to restore the town first to be able to access this option. And lastly, like I've already said, you have the option to station a guard. Now, the differences when you visit a walled city is that you have an additional option of recruiting from the city as well as the tavern. Now, I'll be talking more about recruiting when it comes to the forts, but the tavern is very nice because it allows you to build rapport between different characters. Now, I haven't really dove deep into the rapport system, but basically you build a relationship between two characters, and it eventually allows for special dialogue and builds a relationship between them. I enjoyed this feature a ton because it helps with the immersiveness and allows for you to build units the way you want to build them. So let's finish up with talking about the forts. Really, the sole purpose of the fort is to allow you to be able to recruit mercenaries, as well as performing mock battles, expanding your units, as well as when you get further into the game, you are able to promote characters, which if you've played any game similar to this, it basically allows you to have a name change and a big stat boost when you get to a certain point. I really did enjoy the town and fort system. I think my only complaint was how often they would restock the items, which wasn't very often. Sometimes I felt like I was better off liberating a new city instead of waiting for a restock, but other than that, it was an enjoyable system. In general, there are 4 different races and a bunch of different classes, but the thing is, those different classes are pretty much the same throughout the different races. So I'll start with the different races that you have available and then give a brief rundown of the different classes, and I'll even throw in some of my favorite ones to use. The 4 races that you'll have available throughout the game will be humans, elves, bestials, and angels. Each one of them will unlock within the new nations as you progress throughout the game. Now let's go on to the different classes that are offered. Some of the characters you meet throughout the game have specific classes that cannot be recruited. An example being, after Elaine is promoted, he becomes a High Lord. Or after reaching Drakenhold, you can recruit Gilbert, who is actually a prince. But let's run through most of the general classes that you'll have access to throughout the game. You'll be seeing a lot of different clerics, wizards, witches, hoplites, housecarls, hunters, knights, thieves, and warriors. These are just the general classes that you'll typically have access to, and each nation has some sort of variant throughout them. There are other classes like the Dark Knight, Wyvern Knight, Griffin Rider, Sellsword, Gladiator, a Radiant Knight, and a Sword Fighter, but these ones typically are unlocked a bit further into the game, as well as they're not typically shared throughout the different races. Now, each of the races have their own version of the generic classes. For an example, I'll use Albion's units. Here you have access to the angel units, such as a feather sword or a feather shield, which essentially is the same as using a hoplite or a soldier. Honestly, it's a ton of fun when it comes to the different playable characters the game has to offer, as well as the ability to recruit mercenaries. I think for me the best part was throughout the game, I found myself changing so many different units when I got access to new ones, just to try to build a new group of fighters and make them as powerful as possible, all while trying to maximize their strengths and minimize their weaknesses. There's so many different combinations for you to enjoy and play around with. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the combat system for this game. Now, like every other tactical RPG, each unit has something that they are strong against or weak against. It then becomes up to you to try to combine different units to try to prevent them from getting bested by an enemy unit based off of those strengths and weaknesses. But the reason I enjoyed the combat system in this game so much is because you don't actually control it. Your units are given certain active points and passive points, which they will actually use to perform skills during combat. But it's all completely random and dependent upon the AI in the game. But what you can control is you can set certain parameters for each of your units to perform certain skills if a certain requirement is met. For example, when using a character with a heal, you can set the parameter for that heal to only be used on a character that's below 50% HP, so that way they don't waste the heal if your character is only missing like 2 HP. Or another one is when you have a hunter and you have them focus on characters with the highest evasion. These parameters really allow you to take control of the combat even without being able to actually control it. They can really help you in those tough fights. Another thing I enjoyed was you kind of know the way a fight's going to go just by hovering over an enemy whenever you have one of your units selected. This makes it pretty nice to see who you should and shouldn't attack. Now you can either choose to fight and see how it plays out, which can be fun in the beginning, or you can just choose to kind of skip the fight itself. Now I will say towards the end of the game I found myself watching the fights more and more because I needed to realize what units needed to prioritize what skills, or where they were wasting them, because sometimes you can lose a fight based off of a heal being used when it shouldn't be, so it can be very useful to watch them. Now, bouncing off the combat system, this is going to be a very short section since I'm not going to go crazy in depth into it, but each one of your characters have different types of skills, and like I talked about before, you have active points and passive points, which your character's AI will use to perform attacks or defensive skills or healing. You're able to gain new skills by leveling up, as well as gaining skills from certain pieces of equipment. Past that, there's really not much more to it other than promoting your characters and gaining different skills. Now, I had this whole section prepared to talk about enemy factions and different types of enemies that you're going to see, but I don't really want to dive too deep into it since I don't think it's anything special. Really, you're going to be facing off against Zenora for most of the game, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be seeing other enemies throughout it either, especially since most of the time when Zenora's in control, they can control the different races within those nations. So when you visit Bastorius, you're going to see Beastrels that are being controlled by Zenora, or when you visit Elfheim, you're going to see different elves that are being controlled. The only other enemies you'll meet throughout the game are going to be different mercenaries who have either been hired by Zenora to take control of certain areas, or thieves who have kind of just taken over to make a quick buck or two. The progression system for this game is pretty simple. As you progress throughout the game, you will continue to level your characters, you earn money, and you eventually promote your units. You will need to constantly pay attention to your equipment as you progress, since you can easily fall behind depending on the difficulty level that you're playing on. At the end of most battles, you will earn two different things, one being honor trophies and the second being renown. I'll talk about these briefly, but honor trophies can be used to recruit different mercenaries to your army, as well as they can be used when it comes to promoting your troops, or even expanding your unit's max amount of troops that they can have. Now, when you gain renown, you will continue to rank up and eventually you will reach rank S. But that's jumping a bit ahead since each renown rank allows you to unlock something new. For example, allowing you to have more members per unit, or at some point it allows you to unlock the promotion system. But past that, there really wasn't much else when it came to the leveling or progression system. Now, this is another thing that's pretty simple in the game, the equipment system. You need to constantly pay attention when you reach new towns or cities, since you need to find gear that keeps getting better and better. You will also be collecting equipment for most fights. The equipment you gain as a reward from the fights is typically a lot better since they can give better skills or passive abilities to your characters. Eventually, you will be able to find a blacksmith who can actually raise your attack on your best weapons. However, it seems the most attack power a weapon can have is 25. So what I noticed was if there was equipment that I really liked, but it was underleveled, I could upgrade it at the blacksmith and it could make that equipment more relevant. So make sure you don't sell off your favorite equipment since you can eventually upgrade it and bring it back to be on par with everything else, especially if that equipment has good passive abilities or stat boost that it can provide to your character. Now, I won't be spending too much time talking about the audio or voice acting, since for me, audio is not something that I'm super crucial on when it comes to playing a game, but I do have to say I love the music for this game when it came to the overworld or just the battle music. To bounce off of that, the voice acting was super good. I did play a majority of the game with the English voice actors, which is super rare for me, but I did want to give it a chance since I normally never do. But they did an amazing job. They definitely put a lot into it and it can really show. The retail price for this game is $59.99, and I honestly think this game is completely worth that price, with about a 40 to 50 hour main story depending on the difficulty that you're playing on, as well as a beautifully crafted open world, great combat system, with a ton of different options for playable characters. There is so much to do within this game that it really shows and proves why it's worth that price, as well as the amount of replayability that this game offers. I honestly haven't enjoyed a game like this one in a long time. It made me really want to keep coming back, and when I finally had time to play it, I never felt like I was getting enough of it, or I wanted to keep playing even when I couldn't. I definitely think this game will be competing for my Game of the Year pick, for me personally, since you can play through the story again and make completely different choices and end up with a ton of different characters, or go in and make different units exactly from the beginning, and just go around and have fun. Well, there you go, there's my review of Unicorn Overlord. Hopefully you learned something new or just enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, don't forget to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.